So, hey everybody, I'm Nathan Case. I'm going to be your security geek today. We're going to talk about intro to threat detection. We're going to talk a little bit about threat response and using GuardDuty to do that. So as we go through this, feel free to ask questions. I like to ask questions of my audience and work with them as we go through and make sure that we get understanding going both ways. So who was here yesterday and went through the IR workshop? Pretty much all of you? So this is going to be a bit of dual coverage here, but on the upside, that means I get to ask you questions and make sure you were listening yesterday. So yeah, I remember you. So as we go through this, I'm going to start asking questions. We're going to talk. Feel free to raise your hand if you have anything, and we'll get going. All right. So Amazon GuardDuty, threat detection and response to a given threat. That's kind of what we're going to talk about in the next 45 minutes. Who actually uses GuardDuty here? Anybody? A couple of people? Good. So when we talk about GuardDuty, one of the things I want you to remember today is the first 30 days are free. So when I tell you to turn it on, don't take it like I'm trying to sell you something. It's free. So go ahead and turn it on. See how much it's going to cost you. What's this?
You're selling something.
Well, I am selling something, absolutely. But I'm not making you pay for it. Right away. All right. So quick intro. Amazon GuardDuty is basically a system that continuously monitors your Amazon accounts, your implementations in Amazon for threats. So as we look at this, I want you to remember the words continuous, and I want you to remember that Amazon is really looking at three different things, GuardDuty is looking at three different things to monitor whether or not there's a threat to your Amazon account right now. We're looking at VPC flow logs, we're looking at DNS logs, and CloudTrail events. Now, yesterday when we had the IR workshop, what did we talk about CloudTrail specifically covering? What does that look at? API calls. Wonderful. Thank you. Very good. If I had something, sorry. That's right. API calls. CloudTrail is what's going on inside of Amazon's API system. So like if we talk about services, we're talking about CloudTrail, right? If we're talking about an IAM change, a change to a user, a change to a password, a change to an S3 bucket, we're talking specifically about CloudTrail. Now, we did talk a little bit in one of the things yesterday, one of the events yesterday, about DNS logs. Do you guys remember which GuardDuty finding specifically will go back to DNS logs and review DNS logs? Cryptocurrency mining, right? So if a system is currently calling out to a cryptocurrency mining system, to a management or a command and control server, it's going to get caught on the DNS log side, right? Now we have VPC flow logs. What would we find out in VPC flow logs? Any ideas? So we looked at a couple of things in the GuardDuty Runbooks yesterday that would have had VPC flow logs as the finding factor, or the, go ahead? Port scans, absolutely. So what is VPC flow logs versus like a packet capture scenario? Does anybody know? Right. It doesn't recreate the packet. It's just part of the packet. It's just the destination and the header and what's going on between two instances. So if you want to think about it, it's a record of myself and, Anthony talking, right? It's just me communicating with Anthony and Anthony communicating back with me, not necessarily what we said. All right, so as we look at GuardDuty and we look at how this works, GuardDuty kind of works at the three different domains we talked about yesterday, but it works in two specifically different ways. So when you turn on GuardDuty, when you first enable it, what's going to happen? Any guesses? Is it going to use the behavioral analytics, the machine learning engine, to go ahead and figure out what's going on in your account? No, because it's got to learn, right? What we are going to do is look at things that are signature-based. So when we talked about like port scanning, it doesn't need 30 days to understand that port scanning is a bad idea. So we're going to raise a finding on that. Let's not do port scanning, right? That's not okay. But as we go on, it's going to begin to intelligently detect those threats. As we get 30 to 45 days in, you're going to start seeing things like, hey, Anthony has logged in from some other country that he normally doesn't log in from. That's not okay, right? We want to throw that up as a finding, but that's 30 to 45 days in. Now, if we have a machine learning algorithm on our account looking at our API calls, looking at our VPC flow logs, and looking at our DNS calls, what should we not do with our production systems while it's learning? Change it a lot. it really sucks if you go ahead and teach the machine learning algorithm that it's okay for people to be in your accounts and changing things all the time. Let's not teach it that. Now, as a side note, as you do that with GuardDuty, things do wash out. So once that's happened, you will wash that out after 30 to 45 days anyway, but it does decrease the abilities of that behavioral analytics section. All right, so the findings. We didn't really talk about this yesterday, but if you look at it, there were a handful of different general finding types as we look at GuardDuty. So we kind of talked about this, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more today. If we have these types of finding types, right, we have backdoor, behavior, crypto, pen test, recon. Some of these finding types are going to be more critical than other finding types, right? So what did we have yesterday? Who was the Grinch team? The Grinch team? As you look at the finding types up here, some of these finding types are going to be specifically concerning to your type of application, right? So your application may look at this and say, hey, you know what? If we have cryptocurrency, let's be honest, anybody who has cryptocurrency mining, that's going to be a problem. Let's get rid of that. That's a high issue finding. However, if we have a backdoor, maybe our system is using something that does that. It shouldn't, but maybe it does. If we have a recon finding, maybe somebody is looking at our environment. Maybe, however, our environment is a pen test tool and is looking at someone else's environment. Maybe that's what's supposed to be happening. So these things are going to change a little bit in severity, and understand that going into it. Now, what you're going to find, as operators, frankly, is that all of those 48 items that we looked at yesterday in the runbook, those are going to concatenate into about 4 different event categories. Okay? You're going to have some subset of events that you're going to want to respond to immediately, right now. Cryptocurrency is a good one, right? If I've got cryptocurrency mining, what do I want to do? Chances are I want to remove that instance and go forward. I might want to do forensics on it. I might want to do something, but I'm doing something now. I'm not investigating necessarily. However, if I have a recon attack, do I care so much? Is that something to get someone up at 3 in the morning for because someone did a port scan from another country on my public interface? No, not so much. Yeah. Internal interface is a different question. That's a different problem. Go ahead. What's your question?
Is there like somewhere that is documented? I mean, these are top-level categories, but these are based on a library of known.
So the runbook that I gave you yesterday documents that, and there actually is more documentation on the AWS website that goes into each of those findings and gives you a specific it gives you a threat analysis for it on the website. That said, oh. Not sure I understand the question. One more time.
Well, so if I'm looking like cover a set of known specific threats,
okay.
Right? So I know what How do I know which ones are covered by GuardDuty?
Gotcha. So if I have a threat list that I'm currently thinking about or I'm looking to protect against, how do I know if GuardDuty protects against that or not? And I would tell you that there is really good documentation on AWS's website about which threats are covered, and then you're going to have to go ahead and link that up, crosswalk that to your threat list. CrowdStrike and a couple. Whoa, very hot all of a sudden. Yes, you are correct. There are partners, and we'll get to that at the very end. As we look at the details, however, you will notice that there are threat family names and specifically, let's see here, threat variant. So we can actually look at some of the items inside of that JSON that will show you some of the questions, that sort of a programmatic way to deal with that question. Go ahead, sir. We do not currently support customized signatures, no. The question is, do we support them? And we don't. Currently, there is a whitelist and a blacklist, but all of that said, it is not a signature scenario, no. Go ahead, sir.
How does this map to like a traditional IPS?
That's an interesting question. There is obviously some overlap there. It does not map from the point of view that we're not looking at every packet doing necessarily break and inspect. But it does look at behavior and the analytics that you can get from packets from 2 ENIs or an ENI and an outside system communicating. So there's some overlap there, but keep in mind that we have multiple domains that we're hitting here, right? Your question specifically focuses around one of the first 2 domains that we talked about yesterday, right? Infrastructure or application. However, when we get into the services layer of this, That's really where GuardDuty shines, because a lot of the IPS IDS don't actually focus on that services layer, right? It's really just focusing on those first two layers, the infrastructure and the application. And because it's only focusing on that, it really kind of leaves you vulnerable to the services layer, and that's what GuardDuty's for, right? It fixes all, it doesn't fix it, but it puts protection over all of it.
Does it handle HTTPS?
Doesn't do break and inspect. It does do the two connections going between each other, but if everything's encrypted, everything's encrypted. Sir?
Is there anyone doing mapping between what GuardDuty produces and the Lockheed Martin kill chain?
So is there anyone doing a mapping between what GuardDuty produces and the Lockheed Martin kill chain? There is a very nice gentleman out of London who is doing that right now. He's actually one of our ProServe consultants, and if you would like to get with me after this, I will look up his name and get you communicating with him. Anybody else? We seem to have had a rash of questions. Oh, okay, there we go. One more. Uh-huh.
And your colleague explained to me that GuardDuty spun out of the operations group at Amazon.
Yep.
And because I was in Lambda now, I use both GuardDuty and Macie.
Okay.
Over that. But with GuardDuty, I found it doesn't cover managed services.
Cover managed services.
Lambdas and EC2 obviously Lambdas, that's managed by Amazon.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Does, in that type of setup, given services, like if I have Lambda, that's not covered by GuardDuty, is that also used internally?
So understanding that, so the question is, what does GuardDuty cover when it comes to AWS services? Yeah, well, AWS, just different AWS services. And there would be a statement to be made there about CloudTrail and behavioral oddities. So if we have a production environment and it's running very normally for X number of time, and all of a sudden you log in and start doing crazy stuff, I would argue that that would probably kick off a finding. It doesn't matter what you're doing. But if you start hacking into something and going in a different direction, would it necessarily find a finding if you tried to make a Lambda do something funky? I would argue yes, if you had it set up correctly. But to be fair, I haven't tested it. It would be something that I'd want to sit down with you and actually try to do and see what would come up with. Yeah. Well, posting all sorts of weird, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that, so I'm not going to comment on that. But, yeah, I really want to, but I'm not going to. I like my job. But the reality is that as we get into this, I mean, you have to think about the architecture that you're building, right? And GuardDuty is specifically made for those three domains, or the three domains using the three different log sources, right? So if we look at it and we say we have an application that's running inside of AWS and it's running in an account that's totally DevSecOps and it's being delivered by a specific production pipeline, I would argue that just about everything that you do in that is non-standard is going to get caught. But that said, there are obviously times when it wouldn't, and we'd want to test that. But you need to architect your application. I'll try to repeat the question. Thank you. There are obviously times when you need to make sure that you architect your application correctly so that you're able to make sure that GuardDuty is going to protect you. And some of that might be using ENIs and VPCs when you're running Lambda. So, good Lord, we're never going to get through.
It's not a question, but
It's okay.
it would be really useful for us in RTT when once it does send out an alert, that it gives us a PCAP.
Gives you a PCAP. I tell you what, I've got magic for you. So the question is, it would be really great if GuardDuty would send out an alert and then give us a PCAP. So how would you like to figure out how to do that today? That would be good? So who got the zip file yesterday? Okay, inside the zip file I gave you yesterday is a folder called SSM, and there's actually a PCAP script in there. So if you didn't get it, I'll give you the link after this, and then you can go run that, and we'll talk about how to do that in this talk. Is that cool? Did I repeat the question enough for you? Cool. All right. So we kind of jumped ahead a bit, but we just took up 5 minutes of me going back and forth, so apologies. We talked about this yesterday. Who wasn't here yesterday? Handful of us? Okay. So as we talk about things specifically inside of GuardDuty, inside of AWS, there's this need to go ahead and relate it back to something that we know, right? And so we relate it back to this, right? We've all seen these. We've done these for years. Everybody's made these diagrams, right? Since the 1980s, this is how we talk about a data center. And that's pretty normal. And this is really the first two portions of GuardDuty and threat detection in AWS. We've got the application in the middle, and we have the infrastructure around the edges, right? And that's really taking care of these two domains. Now, in AWS, we have this other domain called services. The services is IAM, it's buckets, it's EMR, it's anything that you could think of. It's any service that AWS has that's out there. All of that's great. But how do we go ahead and monitor that? Well, GuardDuty does do that for us, but as well, we are able to look in CloudTrail when things like that happen. So if there are specific things that happen in CloudTrail that we don't want to have happen, we need to make sure that we watch for that in CloudWatch. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But specifically to your question, that's where I would be watching my CloudWatch events and evaluating what's happened inside of my production environment and using Lambdas to evaluate some of that. And if you look at those folders, there's actually a couple of examples that will show you how to do that in that folder I gave you yesterday. And these are really the services that we're talking about. Now, obviously, like we talked about yesterday, you have this fourth one that's all the meat suits in the audience and all of us who actually cause the problems, let's be honest, in most of our environments. And we can't forget about that. But realistically, GuardDuty is going to do some behavioral analysis of all of us to make sure that what we're doing is OK. Now, that doesn't help us at 4 in the morning when we're messing with an environment that we've been messing with for multiple days. But let's keep in mind that we can go ahead and set up governance policies to stop that from happening. OK? And also, let's be honest, we are consistently the problem in most architectures. All right, so a quick overview. Services domain, infrastructure domain, and applications domain, right? Now, as we begin to respond to these things, in any of the 3 of these domains, we're going to kind of follow this sort of a tree. Have you guys seen this slide before? No? OK. So this slide talks about where we find events, how we manage and think about events, and then how we're going to respond to those events. So if you look at the far left, I'm going to use the laser for those of you on Twitch. Over here, this is where we're finding the events. So if we think about this like a human body or like a neurologic system, this is your fingers, your eyes, your ears, your nose. You figured out something's happened, right? Now, you end up deciding what to do about it in CloudWatch, right? Or AWS Config. And by that, I mean you're using CloudWatch to evaluate that specific event in CloudWatch events, and you might be responding to it on a rule. And we'll go ahead and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But right now, I want you to look at this and think about it as to how would you respond to it. So the original question from the nice gentleman in the corner over there was, what do I do when one of my Lambdas starts acting funny? OK, well, let's talk about it. So if we think about that, we're going to have a CloudTrail event happen up here, right, in AWS CloudTrail. And it's going to migrate down to CloudWatch, right? And we're going to review that event and say, OK, what's happening here? We have a Lambda that tried to execute something in EC2. Well, it's not allowed to do that. So we're going to get a denial, right? And when we get that denial, we're going to go ahead and choose to do something. My rule might state that I'm going to go ahead and kick off a Lambda function that's then going to tell my team, maybe by Slack, that something bad is going on. And I want to go ahead and mitigate that immediately. I want to remediate that now, right? First thing I'm going to do is communicate. Second thing I'm going to do is remediate, right? We need to make sure that we do those things. If we can do them in parallel, that'd be great. I don't know what communication systems you guys use. Now, that might be that we look at this Lambda and we go ahead and we turn off the API, we turn on a different WAF rule. There's all sorts of questions and things that we can do to fix this. But let's assume right now that this Lambda has now fixed it. What do we do? Well, we're going to need to go ahead and make sure that we loop back and tell people about that. But specifically, we're going to use something like AWS step functions to make sure that whatever happened in that fix, whatever the response was in that fix, we're using that step function to evaluate that response and make the next step. And why do we use step functions versus just a Lambda directly? What happens when you run a Lambda and it fails? It just kind of sits there, which kind of sucks, right? Especially if you're doing remediation and you need it to do something if it does fail. So if you've ever tried to disconnect a volume on an EC2 instance and the volume is in use, what happens? just hangs out, right? So if you're running a Lambda to disconnect a volume from an EC2 instance because that's your remediation method, you're going to have to set up some sort of a loop to wait until that volume actually gets kicked out. Or you might have to go ahead and force shut down that instance and then disconnect it. But that whole logic stream is really hard to build in a Lambda. You can do it. Python doesn't have a great case statement scenario, but yeah, sorry. But you could, I know, but you can go ahead and move that through step functions and handle each of those steps and give a logical plan on why, right? And that's really how you ought to be doing it. Why is the other reason that we go through step functions versus Lambda? What do step functions give us that Lambda doesn't give us? Speed? Say again? Scale. State. Absolutely. And it gives us logging too. So really good choice. Second option down here. What if we have an EC2 instance that's having an issue that we have a threat on? Now we have cryptocurrency mining, and it's starting to mine cryptocurrency. We've got Bitcoins going all over the place. What do we do? Yeah, OK. We want to do a packet capture, right? Can I do a packet capture from Lambda? Well, technically, I can. So in Lambda, I can write an SSH script, pulling in an SSH library, SSH in with a key, go into the EC2 instance, and then type pcap via that Lambda into the EC2 instance and do a packet capture. Let's not do that. Please don't. Why don't I want to do that? For numerous reasons other than the obvious. We've kind of built the mousetrap thingy and Rube Goldberg machine, and it's just silly. What other reason would we not want to do that? As a responder, why would I not want to do that? Sudo access? So no. Nice try, though. Preservation of data. Is anything that I've done inside of that SSH prompt tracked in any place in AWS or logs or anything else that I can get to if that's a breached instance? It's not. At least I can't guarantee that it's going to be. But if I use EC2 Systems Manager, right, and I actually run the command through that, it runs inside of that instance, and all of that response is kicked out to S3, and everything's in CloudTrail. Right? So now I can do a PCAP via SSM, and I actually know that I did the PCAP, and I actually get the response. So I know if it worked. Now, I'm going to tell you, as an incident responder, one of the things that I'm going to do first is attach a new volume to my breached instance, right? And I'm going to go ahead and put all of that information on that new volume, and then I'm going to disconnect that new volume when I'm done. And then I'm going to move all of that information over to a forensics account that is entirely disconnected from everything else I do because it's considered contaminated, and I want my production environment not to be contaminated, right? Because Administrator Bob really, really is curious and opens up the volume and oops.
And that wasn't going to be my question.
Oh.
I was going to ask how far you want to go with that. Because, I mean,
Okay.
for example, for setting up this class, I considered my personal account to be production.
Yes.
So I actually have another account.
Yes.
And then I'll talk to you offline about how you integrate between those two.
Okay. And we can go through that. I don't think there's a script in that directory I gave you, but I can walk you through how to do that. That's a really good question. How do you actually go ahead and integrate this concept of I want my forensics account to not be connected to my production account? And the thought is really interesting and really outside scope for this talk, but there's a really interesting talk that probably will be at the Reinforce Summit that will go over that. Okay? All right. So we just talked about Lambda functions and SSM documents, right? SSM is the systems manager thing, right? So let's make a rule. And I know we all don't like rules wonderfully much, but it is the reality of life. Lambda functions act on the outsides or in the service domain of AWS, right? You don't do silly things like write SSH scripts using the SSH libraries to SSH into an instance or do something like that. That's just silly. Don't do it, right? And I've seen people do this. So Lambda stays on the outside. Lambda stays in the service layer. I'm going to use Lambda to do things like attach ENIs, detach ENIs, change security groups, change volumes, do different things at that larger layer, right? I'm going to use SSM to function inside the EC2 box, right? Amazon Systems Manager, yes. To be fair, I think it's just ASM now, but it just switched. I'm sorry. So this is really, SSM is really where we start doing forensics. And it's where we start doing forensics because it logs everything, it's inside the box, and nobody's actually there. I don't have to worry about something coming back down the line at me, right? Like, it's totally broken off by itself. There's nothing that's going to happen other than run the commands I give it, right? Everything I want to do there, network capture, packet capture, memory dump, process review, all can be done through SSM. And better yet, I can build a whole library of these documents and run them all at once. And say, you know what, I've prepped all of this to begin with. I have my forensics documents that I need to do immediately. I'm going to run this document, and then I'm going to move it over to the forensics environment and blow away that machine. And there's some examples of that in that SSM library, in the SSM folder if you want to look. Okay? Folks on Twitch, I'm sorry. So how do we get from here to there? Who has all of this done in their environment today? Nobody's got this done? Really? Yeah, it's a lot of work. And to be fair, it really is. There are generally going to be 4 different classifications, and generally that's going to end up in 4 major lambdas that you have to write. However, it's still a lot of writing. So where do we start? We start by enabling GuardDuty. Yes, I know, sales, sorry. But the reality is that this gives us something that other things won't give us, right? We're going to get something out of this. And what are we going to get out of this? We're actually going to start getting findings. Now, this is one that I've set up there's a way to like trick it into giving you a cryptocurrency mining because you just send out a DNS request to a domain, right? So we can go ahead and trick it into giving a cryptocurrency, and that's great. Yeah. It still comes up as cryptocurrency because it's a DNS request, right? So off you go. But all of that said, we have this wonderful thing in here that will give us all of the default responses for GuardDuty. And we saw that yesterday in the runbook that we had, right? All of the 46 or plus responses, findings that GuardDuty is going to give you are going to be in here. And in those findings, I'm going to get the JSON for each of them. And because I'm getting the JSON for each of them, I can begin to code them in the responses that I'm going to write. So I have all the data that I, as a developer, need to begin to actually solve this problem. And it's all there for me. So you can turn it off after you get all of that if you want to. I don't care, whatever. But all of the information that you need in there is in that initial findings screen. All right. So we're going to do an auto remediation. Okay? Who's done auto remediations before? Who's actually written some of these? Nobody? So let's play a game. I like playing games. So we're going to go ahead and remediate cryptocurrency mining because in your AWS account, you can't possibly ever want cryptocurrency mining, right? That generally is a bad thing. It's going to cost you a lot of money. You're not going to get any of the Bitcoins, so you might as well not do it, right? So if this is true, what are we going to do? So I'm going to do an account password reset. Chances are somebody that's got this, their account's been breached. We need to reset that password, sure. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to reset Administrator Bob's password. Cool. First step, right? We're solid with that? Make sense? Yeah, life happens. We're going to remove that instance. Cool? Because that makes sense. We want to remove the instance, right? What else do we want to do? Log, all sorts of things, right? And your internal management and legal department is not happy with you anymore. Why? Because you didn't talk to anybody about it. So, as silly as it sounds, this is one of the first things before we start doing remediation that we need to do, is sit down with our HR, our legal teams, our internal management, and make sure that everybody understands what we're going to start doing here. And if that means for the first 6 months we're just getting notifications, we need to get notifications for the first 6 months. I suggest emails that actually have this is what I'm going to do in 6 months. It's going to involve restarting or removing your server from existence. Okay? If that's really where you want to end this. In many cases, that may be enough. That may be all you need to do. But trust me, you don't want to get to the end of this process where you've actually removed something and find out that you shouldn't have removed it. Right? It doesn't work well. I had a very nice individual come up to me after the public sector summit and give me a very heartfelt story about how he had set a lot of this stuff up and they had keyed it off of CPU utilization. And as the CPU utilization went up, they began to think there was an issue. And so when it got up to 99% and hung there for a while, they would restart the servers. Okay, because they had a memory leak. It is what it is. You know, these things happen. Pretty cool, right? Because you can do all of that, right? It's all right there for you to do. What do you think happened when they tried to close the books at the end of the quarter? Servers kept rebooting. Do you think the finance department was happy about that? I'm going to guess no. So when we talk about doing a lot of these auto remediations, make sure the end user that you're actually dealing with here is in the room when you talk about how to do the auto remediations. They have something to say. Okay? Runbooks. Who enjoyed the Runbook session yesterday? I've got 2 people, a handful of people, thank you. So Runbooks, as silly as it is, and I know that we've all done these from the 1970s, nobody really does them anymore, and when they don't do them and you jump into auto remediation or remediation in general, what you end up doing is making a lot of mistakes. So who does development? We got a handful of developers. You guys know what user stories are? What do you think runbooks are? User stories. Yeah. So it's just a quick and easy way for you to actually start doing the agile development that you ought to be doing anyway and writing down all your user stories. And if you want to look at it like a waterfall scenario, that's cool. Just go ahead and tack them all together end to end. There's your waterfall. But realistically, you've got a way to do this, and it helps you with your company, and you're actually going to have a better communication with your boss and your boss's boss as you go through this, right? You've got written things that you need to do. This is what people said, right? And I would even go so far as to say that as you start working through this, try the runbooks a couple of times with people. Game day it, do SIRS, security incident response simulations, and evaluate whether that game day actually does what you need it to do. All right. Attribution. Do you care about attribution or not? Who cares about attribution? Some of us. Some of us really don't. I actually have a customer that I work with routinely that really doesn't care. And they just burn the server when they figure out somebody's on it and they make a new one. Why? Because there's absolutely no information on the server and they think it's kind of funny that people keep trying to get on. Okay, that's your call. That's not really the call I would make, but fine. If the business has decided that's the answer, that's the answer. Do you have third parties that need to get to the information that you're basically catching? If you have a third party, chances are that third party shouldn't be in your production environment. So you're going to need to set something up for that third party to access and deal with, right? If you're going to do forensics and you're going to use a third-party company to do the forensics, you don't want them doing forensics in your production environment. You need to ask whether you even care to do forensics. Okay? I've been to a number of companies that do forensics and they grab all of the mem dumps that they can and all the packet captures. And they put them all in a big S3 bucket and it sits there forever. If that's a business need for you guys and you're regulated and you have to do that, by all means do that. However, if it is not, and you're not actually using that data, why? Why do you have it? Why are you doing it? If you need to do it, that's cool, but ask the questions prior to going into that situation. Don't ask the questions morning of and figure out whether you need to do a memory dump or not. Try to figure out what the implications of that are. Sort of a scenario that has come up recently. Who cares about sovereignty of data? Sovereignty of data? Do you have data in Europe or Canada? Can you do incident response in the US for the data that you have in Canada and Europe? One of those questions that you need to ask now as opposed to morning of. Okay, go ahead.
Do you guys do anything to assist with the admissibility aspect?
Do we do anything to assist on admissibility aspects?
Chain of custody,
So I would tell you to go speak to your legal advisor. Come speak to me afterwards. And I will give you the same answer I give everybody else privately when they ask me. Anybody else?
I had a quick question about GuardDuty. Can it kind of function like encase where you can put an image, work on that image?
So GuardDuty only generates findings. It doesn't do something. So what you're going to do when we look at, I'll run through this and we'll talk about that specific statement here in a second. We're going to do kind of a mental exercise here, and that'll answer that question.
A question on cryptocurrency.
And I didn't repeat the question, I apologize. He asked if GuardDuty does what Ncase does, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Got a question about cryptocurrency as
Okay.
an example. I believe from yesterday that Amazon's aligning with the cryptocurrency mining on ECPs, but it's not defined at the government level
I
as opposed to
don't think it's a problem for you doing it. If you want to do it, go ahead, man. It's not going to pay off for you.
I was trying to map it to the auto renews that happen
Yeah,
where my NFTs get published,
yeah,
and that's just becomes my default.
yeah. So the thing about cryptocurrency is it doesn't pay off. And there are plenty of things that you can do in Amazon, I suppose, if you really want to. That would be one of those things that I suppose you can do it, just to figure out if you can do it maybe, but you're not going to make money doing it. If you would, we would be doing that all the time instead of this.
Okay, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay. We get into our mental exercise here. So we're going to pretend that there's an Administrator Bob. Who has an Administrator Bob in their company? Everybody loves Administrator Bob. Administrator Bob has been there for 20 years. He knows everything you're doing. You love Administrator Bob. Administrator Bob is the man, right? We all love Administrator Bob. He actually goes home and works from home occasionally, right? Tonight, GuardDuty has noticed a problem, right? This problem is that all of a sudden we have an abnormal ASN. We have something that doesn't normally happen. Administrator Bob is logging in from home. That's odd. Okay, whatever, no big deal. Maybe I get a notification at this point, right? I've seen that Administrator Bob is logged in from home, and I, as the SecOp, is looking at this and going, oh, that's Bob, what do you do? Well, we start looking at things, and we notice that Bob is doing funny things, right? We're going to go ahead and go to the Lambda and start tracking what Bob is doing, and that's just going to be this Lambda basically looking at CloudTrail and seeing what Bob is doing, right? And starting to keep track of it, maybe. Or keeping track over the course of 10 minutes. And maybe I, as the SecOp, is just running this Lambda manually. Maybe I'm going ahead and clicking a web button to do it. Maybe I'm doing it through an API. Not the point. The point is that we can go through this Lambda into CloudTrail and actually figure out what Bob's doing, right? So we look at it, and Bob is totally messing with this instance. Okay. Why is Bob messing with the instance? I don't know. Well, it looks like there's a volume on the instance, and we've got 2 ENIs. That's odd. Normally, we only have 1 ENI on an instance. It looks like Bob may have added the second ENI. Huh. Well, maybe Bob is doing something operationally that requires a second ENI? Yep. Maybe. It happens, right? It's cool. OK, the first ENI has a security group that goes to 80 and 443. OK, normal. It's traffic. We don't like the 80, but maybe your application needs it, whatever. It's cool. The second ENI, however, has 3389 going to the world. Who likes that one? For those of you on Twitch, nobody's raising their hand. This is not a good answer. And if Bob has just changed this, and that's in CloudTrail, what is Bob? A problem. Bob is now an insider threat, right? We have crossed the line. So what are we going to do? How are we going to respond to this? Are we going to do a packet capture? Are we just going to blow that away and start and keep going like nothing happened? Maybe talk to Bob? Calling Bob is probably not a bad idea at this point. If Bob is asleep in his home, we got problems, right? What's happened if this happens? What do I care about? What am I going to look at to evaluate whether bad things have happened now? Inbound traffic on that ENI. So I'm going to go to VPC flow logs. I'm going to go to that ENI, and I'm going to figure out what's going on, right? Is it IPs from Bob's house, or is it IPs from a nation state somewhere else, right? And once the security group was made, was there a whole bunch of traffic or just a little bit of traffic? Did we have data exfil suddenly go through this or not? So who knows where security groups lie? When you look at the interface, what does it look like a security group is attached to? And I've kind of given you the answer here, but it's kind of an important thing to think about as you look at the interface. I think we did kind of a poor job of representing this, but security groups are actually attached to ENIs. So each ENI has its own separate security group and its own separate rules for ingress and egress. So you need to look at that and deal with that on an ENI by ENI basis, okay? If we blow this away, We still have all the VPC data and all the important stuff that we've got, right? And we can start to do some interesting stuff. So we can do a packet capture if we want to, right? We can leave that E&I there. If we want to do threat intelligence on this, we can start running that SSM script that we talked about and begin to do the packet capture, the memory dump, and all of the things that we need to do. Now, the first thing we're going to do is this, right? And how are we going to add this volume? Who remembers when we talked about this initially? How are we going to add this volume to the instance? What service are we going to use? Nobody's going to give me a hands up? Okay, SSM and Lambda. Which is the right answer? Lambda. It's external. I'm acting on the outside of the instance. If I had to use SSM, I'm going to have to increase the profile ability, the IAM permissions of that machine to do that. What happens if I do that? I've given the machine that we think might be breached extra permissions on the account. Is that a happy thing? Generally, no. That is not a happy thing. That ends badly. So we want to make sure that we leave the profile the way it is, and we check things through Lambda, right? Now we're going to run SSM commands. We're going to run SSM commands for PCAP. We're going to run SSM commands for Lime, PS-EF, you name it. We're going to do all of that, and it's going to go down to our forensics volume, right? And then when we're done, right, because we're using, now to be fair, you can actually use systems manager automation now or step functions. Both of those things have the ability to deal with the state of the current actions that you're doing. So you do have a choice there. But let's pretend for now we're doing a step function, and it's just validating routinely that, hey, we're not done yet, we're not done. OK, now we're done, right? And then it's going to go ahead and remove the volume. Now what do we want to do? Thoughts? We blow it away, right? Maybe we're going to go ahead and make a snapshot of this. Do we really want this instance around for much longer if it's been violated, if we are now breached? Go ahead.
Depends. If you're working with state and federal authorities, you may want to isolate the instance.
Very good. That is the if-then here, right? There are regulations that will require you to do specific things. I would urge you to talk to your legal counsel about what things you have to do. Well, ideally, you've done this beforehand, right? I mean, ideally, if we're going to follow our runbook, we did this when we set up the runbook, certainly. And that's one of the things we have to ask here. What are we required to do? I don't want state and local authorities running through my production systems, period. If I don't want Bob there, I certainly don't want them there, because I trust them a hell of a lot less than I trust Bob. But that said, what are we going to do? I'm going to tell you that I want to maintain chain of custody, and I want to get chain of custody assurances from my legal team and make sure that everybody agrees that what we're doing is going to do that in a court of law, if I care about attribution. I'm going to go ahead and make a snapshot, and then everything is going to go over to the new forensics account. Okay? Make sense to everybody? Everybody pretty happy about that? Go ahead, sir. So that's an interesting question, right? Because so one of my friends, Josh Dulac, who's actually on our team, oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. So does the new Hibernate feature allow us to do anything interesting with this type of a thought? And the answer is maybe. There's a guy named Josh Dulac that works on our team that saw that and went, well, that means that I'm just going to hibernate the machine, and I'm just going to take a snapshot of it, because then I'm going to get the memory on the root volume, and I'm not going to get a PCAP necessarily, but I'm going to get an actual state of machine, and I can probably go boot that somewhere else. And I think that's a really great idea. I haven't seen it done yet. I think it's one of those, just like we talked about systems manager automation. That's a new way to do the same stuff that we were doing in step functions, but easier now because it's built into systems manager. It actually does not function inside the machine. It functions on the API on the outside. So there's some really interesting stuff going on there too. All right, so runbook example. Basic runbook example for you so you can go ahead and start doing this for yourselves. You'll be able to download the slides. To generate the sample findings, there's the button. You get a whole list, and whoosh. So if we're going to fill this out in the runbook, what are we going to do? So if we're going to look at the cryptocurrency mining model and we're going to go ahead and fill this out, let's pretend for a moment that this isn't cryptocurrency, but rather it's the new ASN that we just saw with Bob. We're going to go ahead and find that, and we're going to make sure that we understand where the JSON is in these files that we need. And in this case, we've got the finding type and the instance, because we've got an instance that's been breached, right? So we're going to look at that, and we're going to go ahead and put that in our runbook. And we're going to make sure that the things we need to deal with this on a remediation stance are right there at the top, right? It's way up there at the top. These are the things that we need to gather to deal with a remediation on this type of a finding. Now, if we're talking about ASN or we're talking about cryptocurrency, it's pretty straightforward. We might have an account breach, we might have a hardware breach, or an application breach. We need to figure out which one of the two it is. As we go through, we're going to write normal English, how we're going to fix this breach. And I say normal English because I want you to write it out so that the people that actually have the application can understand what you're saying. Okay? So if you're a developer, cool, don't write this in Python. Right? Seriously, I want your manager and your manager's manager to be able to look at that and go, oh yeah, I want to terminate the instance. I know what terminate the instance means. Right? Now eventually you're going to get to this part. Right? And this is kind of a pseudocode scenario of this is what we're going to do. But that said, the first thing I want to make sure that we do is kick off the SNS to say that, hey, we've got an issue. Right? Yes, we've got multiple findings, and probably you're looking at a bunch of findings in GuardDuty. We can talk about how to go ahead and put those in the archive, and that's great. But I want to make sure that you have communications going outside of AWS to your incident responders so they know what's going on, and that remediation can begin. Hi.
About Runbooks being like user stories.
Yeah.
Previously you said writing in English. Would you recommend writing out like a user story saying,
Yeah.
if I'm in the legal department, I can do this and break it out?
So the question is, can we write this step? Can we write this step as if it were a user story? Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Go nuts. Make all of this user stories. Why? Because it makes it easier for the developers who are going to have to help you code this, most likely. And to be fair, it's a really great way to track what you're doing. So we've got escalation path down here at the bottom. I would suggest that Amazon support, if you've got enterprise support, is in this list, and relatively early in this list. Okay? I would also suggest that you go all the way up to people who can actually make the hard call if you need to, and that might mean that you've got a phone number in there somewhere. Okay? In this particular example, there's a couple of GitLab items that you can go grab from AWS Labs, and it'll give you some examples on how to do it. There's also a download that we did yesterday that I'll put up on the board here in a minute that you guys can all download that has some of the examples of how to do some of this stuff. Right. These are our partners. Did you want to take a picture of that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, good. Okay. Typically I do, but yeah, maybe. Except if you take pictures. Now that you took pictures, I'm not getting the slides. All right, these are some of our wonderful partners. I've had the pleasure of working with many of them. Really good folks. The one partner, oh yeah, no, they're there. I was going to say, the one partner I don't see up there is Redlock, but they're there. All really good people. Go to the partners page, take a look at it. All of these people now work with the security, well, not all of, a lot of these people now work with the Security Hub, which kind of takes the findings that we just talked about today, integrates Macie, integrates Config, and really kind of has it in one place for you, and it's really kind of a nice way to do it. So also a secondary thing. All right, final thoughts. Review everything. When we talk about the cryptocurrency mining thing, yeah, you've got cryptocurrency mining going, that's cool, but probably you have an account leak, right? Somebody's leaked credentials somewhere. So chances are you need to deal with both of those things, not just the first one. So try to be very broad about how you're thinking about these things. When we're looking at how to do it next, don't freak out about these things. These things are going to happen. It's okay. Well, to be fair, it's not okay. But it's okay that it's happened and now you're dealing with it because you're there to deal with it. Let's, however, fix it so it doesn't happen again. Okay? A couple of GitHubs for you, Git secrets, ECS secrets, Scout 2, different tools that you can use in your environments will stop you from posting AWS keys and secret keys to GitHub, which as an incident responder for AWS, I'm keen on you not doing. Most of the incident responses that I have to deal with are because people post their keys to Git. Please don't do that. Prevention versus reaction, at least permissions, right? There are things that we can do that allow us to prevent things versus reacting to things. This whole presentation has been built on the concept that you are reacting to an outside event. I would rather that you'd prevented those events from happening to begin with. Make sure that you use least privileged accounts in all of the things that you can do. right? There's really no reason not to. DevSecOps. We kind of talked about that the first day a little bit. DevSecOps is a way to test development in process. So not only are we testing things and doing detective services, we're actually doing code reviews. And the systems like Lambda are actually looking at the code that you write, and they're evaluating whether that code is following your governance policies. We'll talk about that later in the week. It boils down to no humans in production, period. And I don't want humans in production because if I have humans in production, I cannot find, oh, come on, guys. What can't I find if I have a whole bunch of humans in my production environment? I can't find the threat. Production is always set apart. As a side note, there are no humans in pipelines. Pipelines are also secure and should never have a human in them. So if you have a pipeline and you have it open to the world, what happens? If I, the hacker, get a hold of your pipeline, what am I? Say again? A problem? Decidedly a problem, yes. I am now your administrator, and that's not a happy thing. So pipelines, just like production environments, are a no human zone. Okay? Guard duty plus planning, runbooks times SIRS times partners equals more sleep for everybody. We all like that equation. As far as administrators, SecOps, that's really where we want to be. Try to maintain that. SIRS, we talked about it a little bit. Now that we've talked about how to build a runbook, practice the runbook. Pretend the runbook is real and actually do it. So if I were you, and the call to action here is enable guard duty, it is free for the first 30 days. It will tell you after the first 30 days how much it's going to cost, and you can always disable it. No big deal. My personal account that I do all of my demonstrations and leave wide open so that I have issues that I can actually show people, ran about 1 million different CloudTrail events last month and cost me 14 cents. Take it or leave it. Your call. And that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk. If you have questions, now's the time. Sir? I will bring up the slides momentarily. Anybody else? Questions? All right. Oh, we got one guy over here.
Some companies, like especially financial companies, they prefer not to use public cloud.
Some companies don't prefer to use public cloud, AWS or other. What is the reason for that? Yeah, I'm not going to comment on people's thought process or other people's minds. Generally, I don't know. As far as my concern and the way I look at the cloud, I see a way to log, catalog, and evaluate everything that happens in a data center that I never could do when I was responsible for data centers. So my favorite story is, the favorite example that I give, who here has a data center or uses a data center at work? So a lot of us, right? Who has a gate guard? You have a gate guard? So a gate guard is frankly kind of like the services in the cloud, right? He's the guy that lets you in. He's kind of like IAM in all honesty, right? Because if I can convince the gate guard to let me in, then I'm going to have access to the system. So yeah, he's a service. How many people have a logbook that goes with the gate guard? How many times is that logbook wrong? Guess what? I can tell you every time something bad happens in CloudTrail. I can evaluate what's going on and respond to that as quickly as is physically possible. Do guards generally like you plugging things into the back of their heads? Not so much. So as much as I would like to drain all of the logs out of that guard's head, I can't. Because he is a human, because he is the meat suit, because he is a meat suit in production, I can't get what I want out of that guard. As much as that guard is scary and may even have a weapon, there's nothing I can do about it. It doesn't actually fix the problem because somebody's going to walk up to him and eventually say, I really have to go to the bathroom, please, it's cold, let me in. And he's going to feel bad for that person, he's going to let him in. And then what happens from there is anybody's best guess. So no, I really think cloud is the way to go. Sir?
Non-technical question.
Non-technical question.
You made references to yesterday's content.
Yes, I did.
Yesterday's
I will put up the slide momentarily for everybody to get that.
Okay,
Not a problem, though. Think we're good?